Shalom Chaverim, hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you could join me again. Today we'll be looking at a video by The World According to Briggs, who took a look at demographics of the Jewish community in America. How many Jews in what state? And I thought it'd be an interesting opportunity to talk a little bit about how few Jews there actually are in America, where our communities are, and what they're like a little bit from my experience. All right, let's go ahead and get this started.
Today we're looking at which states have the largest percentage of their population that identifies as Jewish. We've done several videos in this series, like the whitest states and the blackest states, and a couple months back we did the most Asian states and the most Hispanic states.
Demographics are something that a lot of people find really interesting, and an interesting note about demographics in this country is that, according to many surveys by Pew over the last few decades, people in America often vastly overestimate how many Jews there are in America. When asked, they often say something between 10 and 20% of the U.S. population, sometimes even more. And in fact, Jewish people only make up about 2.5% of the U.S. population. So we're really a small group, although, we're and concentrated in some areas. So I think this might be an interesting video to see, where the Jewish populations are in America right now.
During that time, I've had more than a few requests to do the most Jewish
I think a lot of
states,
us can guess.
So here we are. As I researched this video, I was surprised at the states that showed up and where they showed up. Mostly because I grew up in an area of Southern California that has a large Jewish community. And several of the cities in my part of California have even larger communities than the one that I had there in Torrance and Redondo. But this is a perfect example of your experience doesn't always line up with the stats. This normally happens with crime stats in smaller cities. I say someplace has low crime and some local tells me I'm wrong. The crime rate is through the roof because their car got broken into and they had some illegal dumping at the city park or something like that.
I gotta say, this has nothing to do with the video of what he's saying, but I had no idea there was this much Jewish B-roll available. So he certainly found a lot.
My favorite with people like that, when I point out that the stats paint a different picture, they're all, well, there's plenty of other crimes that aren't being reported. But today we're looking at the states that have the largest portion of their population showing up as Jewish according to the US Census. Got it? Get it? Good. Number 10, Illinois. Now, this one totally makes sense. Chicago has a long history with the Jewish community. It's not just there. They've got plenty of other smaller towns and smaller cities that have good-sized Jewish populations. As a Jewish comedian once said, and I forget his name, I apologize, but he said growing up in the 60s in Chicago, the place was filled with Polish Jews. Actually, his exact words were, the place was silly with Polish Jews. The locations with the highest
usually not the best look to say a place is silly with anybody. So, just as a note.
Jewish communities, obviously Chicago, and then you got Bloomington, Champaign, and Danville. 2% of Illinois' population identifies as Jewish.
So that tracks pretty much with, most of the nation.
Number 9, California. Surprise, surprise. Like I said, the Jewish community is big in California, always has been. And if you want to go with the stereotypical reasons, a lot of it has to do with the entertainment industry, but they're also big in the different manufacturing and importing, exporting in the Los Angeles area. That's just in my old neck of the woods. All of California has different Jewish communities. One industry that is big down in Southern California where I grew up is the importing of textiles, like different fabrics, things like that. Actually worked for a couple of them back in the day. And I dated two Jewish girls in high school, not at the same time. They knew each other. What's entertaining about this, and I'll tell a little story here. One was, Americanized Jewish family, and I don't really think they were that into it. They had a problem with their daughter dating a non-Jewish guy. The other girl was born in Israel. The whole family came over there, Israeli Jews. They'd only been there like 10 years when I knew her, and that family welcomed me with open arms. The largest Jewish communities are
Okay, that's actually a really interesting story. So, and it points out that Israeli Jews grow up in a kind of different milieu than many American Jewish families. and families are also different. But I'm glad he had a positive experience with Jewish people. There are a lot of Jews in California, and in Los Angeles there are a lot. There's Hollywood, like you're thinking about, but there's also a large Persian Jewish population in Los Angeles, and that's some great diversity of the Jewish people that we have in Los Angeles, where I lived for a couple years when I was in rabbinical school. And so it's really nice to see those communities interact, the Ashkenazi communities and the Persian communities, Sephardi communities. It's really great. And that's a cool thing about Jewish life in Los Angeles.
Be in the Los Angeles area in California. More specifically, the Fairfax district. 2.4% of California's population is identified as Jewish according to the U.S. Census, and the biggest communities, like I said, are Los Angeles and the Fairfax district in Los Angeles. Number 8, Arizona. Now, Arizona gets an asterisk. There's another state on this list that gets an asterisk too, because their Jewish community almost doubles in the winter months. A lot of snowbirds. But Arizona has some pretty big Jewish communities. Downtown Phoenix is big, Fountain Hills, which is in the Phoenix metro area, and then different neighborhoods around Tucson. The U.S. Census says that 2.5% of Arizona's population is identified as Jewish, and that swells up to 4.6 during the winter months.
A lot of Jewish people retire to Arizona or Florida. Florida is a big one for East Coast Jews. Phoenix and some areas of Arizona are big ones for Jews more on that side of the country, but also some East Coast Jews when they retire. They often move from colder weather states. Other groups do this too, but I'm just mentioning it.
Number 7, Delaware. Delaware is one of those places you really don't think about too much unless you live there or you're from the area. Delaware only shows up on my list when we're talking about cities with the highest crime, because Wilmington, Delaware has some serious crime.
Didn't know it had that much
the rest
crime.
of the state outside of Wilmington is pretty nice, and it really should show up in more videos. They're just kind of really middle of the road outside of Wilmington as far as stats go. Not too bad, not too great, just kind of there in the middle. They're like average for most things. Although Wilmington has the largest concentration of Jewish people in Delaware, you'll still find a good-sized community in Dover, and then down in the southern part of the state by Felton, Laurel, Georgetown, Millsboro, places like that. 2.7% of Delaware's population is identified as Jewish.
Okay.
Number 6, Massachusetts. This one shocked me a little bit. I really thought they'd be higher up on the list, but their population isn't as concentrated as I thought it was going to be. But they do have some pretty good-sized Jewish communities. Places like Lexington, Needham, and Newton would be considered the usual suspects. If you want to look outside the Boston area, you can go down to Springfield and Longmeadow, which is a suburb of Springfield right there on the border with Connecticut, on the Connecticut River. I mean, living right next door to Connecticut really sucks, but, maybe they'll build a wall someday. 3.2% of Massachusetts' population is Jewish.
One of the places he didn't mention was Waltham, which is where Brandeis University is. Brandeis University is not a Jewish school, but often has many Jewish students, and is named after Louis Brandeis, the first Jewish Supreme Court justice.
Number 5, Maryland. Maryland is a lot like Delaware in the respect that you never really hear about it unless we're talking about crime, and then their biggest city comes into play. With Delaware, it's Wilmington. With Maryland, it's going to be Baltimore. And believe it or not, Baltimore does have some really good neighborhoods. So
I grew up in Maryland and went to undergraduate and my first graduate degree at Towson University in Baltimore, Maryland. So I got a chance to live in a couple places in Maryland. There are a lot of Jewish people in Maryland. We had a lot of Jewish people at my public school. We had very large synagogues. It's a wonderful place to grow up. I really like Maryland. It's got a pretty sizable Jewish population, and it's not a big state. So there's having two big Jewish populations in Washington and also in the suburbs of Washington and also Baltimore and its surrounding county makes it a pretty high percentage. So I was pretty sure I'd see it on this list, and I'm glad I did.
have some pretty horrible neighborhoods, sort of like Chicago. Chicago has the South Side. Baltimore has Cherry Hill and West Baltimore. They also got a bunch of other places, but those are the two worst. Well, I'd say close to the two worst. That fluctuates with who you talk to and what year it is. Now, those are a couple of the bad neighborhoods of Baltimore, but today we're looking at the Jewish community in Maryland. And if you're looking for Jewish towns or communities, you probably want to look at Germantown and White Oak. There's a few other ones, but those two towns have good-sized Jewish communities.
Kent Mill, Silver Spring, Rockville, Gaithersburg, Potomac. That's just in Montgomery County. Reisterstown Road in Pikesville. That's one that I would have mentioned for sure. There are plenty of Jewish areas. Obviously, plenty of other areas too.
Overall, 3.3% of Maryland's population is Jewish. Number 4, Florida. Yes, put your teeth back in your mouth. It's Florida. Most of you thought Florida was going to be number 1. I think it might have been some years back, but that's kind of slowed. I mean, it's still a thing. Jewish people flock down there. The snowbirds do. And this is the other place that has the asterisk because their Jewish population jumps during the winter months here in North America. Some of their largest Jewish communities are in towns like Fort Lauderdale, Pembroke Pines, Weston, Florida, and of course Palm Beach. They've got a whole bunch of other ones. I could sit here for the rest of this video and just name off places in Florida where they have good-sized Jewish communities. I was watching one gentleman and he was under the impression that Palm Beach was about 50% Jewish. It's not.
Probably not 50% Jewish. I can't believe he didn't mention Boynton Beach, which is just south of Palm Beach, and was one of the first major Jewish, retirement areas in Florida.
It averages about 9%, a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on what season it is. But overall, the Jewish population in Florida is 3.6% of the total population. During the winter months, it's estimated to jump up to about 4.8%. Number 3, Connecticut. On the southern tip of Connecticut near New York City, you'll find a lot of communities of people that actually work in New York City and then own homes in Connecticut. In that area, you have a little area called Norwalk and Westport. They have a pretty good Jewish community in that area with a few other ones sprinkled throughout Connecticut, like West Haven. West Haven has a pretty good sized community as well. 3.9% of Connecticut's population is Jewish. In Norwalk and Westport, I saw different numbers, but they have them around 30%. It was like in between 30 and 40%. Different studies, different surveys have different numbers. Number 2, New Jersey. New Jersey has a lot of the same things going on that Connecticut does. It's close to New York City. A lot of people will buy homes outside the city in Connecticut, Pennsylvania actually also, and New Jersey. Now the part that's just outside of New York City, that is where the highest concentration of the Jewish community you will find, most synagogues, things like that. But throughout the state, you have a lot of different really nice Jewish communities, like Aberdeen, Allenhurst, Bradley Beach, East Brunswick, Eatontown, Edison. They got all kinds of good ones to choose from, and some not so good ones to choose from. 6.7% of New Jersey's population is Jewish.
That's a huge number. And obviously, yes, there's a large Haredi community in the northern New Jersey area around New York City. There are plenty of Jews of all denominations there, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform. And also throughout the state, from the middle of New Jersey as well. And of course, I knew many people from the Cherry Hill area and the area just outside of Philadelphia in South Jersey. My mother actually grew up in Margate, which is on the Jersey Shore. And there are Jews there and a synagogue that's been there for a very long time. So Jersey I love Jersey, and there's a lot of places with significant Jewish communities that have been there for a very long time.
All right, before we get to number 1, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps us out a lot. And every 100
subscribe to this channel too.
We give our pig.
That's a cute pig. Subscribe to this channel too, and also like the video and ring the bell, all those things. Apparently it really helps. Get this comment too, share what you think. It really helps apparently.
Muffin, a treat. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, New York. Yeah, this is no surprise. If you've ever been to New York or watched a Billy Crystal comedy.
So my dad and his whole side of the family is really from this New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, but a lot of them are from New York. And he grew up in Plainview on Long Island. My grandmother grew up in Brooklyn, and my great-grandmother immigrated to this country, to New York. So, there's a lot of Jews who have family ties to New York, especially because of immigration. And in the early 20th century, Jews were immigrating to America. They were doing it for opportunity. They were doing it because this was a free country that freely let people practice their religion, which was not our experience in Europe and overseas. So it was really great to be able to come to a country that would let us live authentically as ourselves. And also they were coming, at first they were just coming for opportunity. Later they were coming because of fascism in Europe and the Nazis and the Holocaust. But my sister lives in New York too.
Special, New York is silly with Jewish people, especially New York City. That's how I learned that New York City had a large
silly with Jewish people.
Jewish community by Billy Crystal back when I was like 14, I think. Saw his comedy act and he talked about growing up in New York City in a Jewish community and how he grew up thinking the entire state of New York was just Jewish. And he talks about how he spent too much time with his grandfather and started acting like his grandfather. He'd wake up in the morning and goes, I got a goddamn Little League game today. I don't have the energy for this. But New York and New York City especially has a long history with the Jewish community and quite a few different Jewish neighborhoods or communities or boroughs, whatever you want to call them. New York City has the second largest number of Jews in a metropolitan area behind Tel Aviv, Israel. No kidding. Some of the more Jewish neighborhoods in New York City, you got Flatbush in Brooklyn, Crown Heights in Brooklyn, Riverdale in the Bronx, Forest Hills in Queens. You got the Upper East Side and Washington Heights in Manhattan, and a few other ones too. The Jewish community in New York State has dropped.
Shout out to Great Neck, New York.
Over the last 40 years or so. I saw one report that said New York State's Jewish population dropped by about 350,000 since 1980. That being said, they still have the highest percentage of Jewish residents than any other state. 8.8% of
8.8 is huge. It's obviously, as you see, way more than any other state. And it actually, as he pointed out, used to be more. A lot of things have changed in New York, and some Jews have moved away, and more people have moved into New York. New York's a even bigger city than it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So the population is smaller now. At one point, it was much higher.
New York's population is Jewish. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some.
Okay, thank you very much, Briggs, for this wonderful video that you made, and I appreciate the chance to react to it. I found the information very interesting. I hope everyone watching did too. Shalom, Chaverim.